Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here tonight. It's going to be a good night altogether. I'm Clément Sacomani, it's written on the screen, and I'm the lucky managing director of NOOR. NOOR is a collective of 15 photographers, filmmakers, artists, journalists, writers, and since a few weeks we are also in one of our member windsurfer speed record. Thanks. Thanks. Our collective is made of 15 human beings from 13 different countries, and they are documenting, investigating, and witnessing our world. NOOR is an Arabic word which means light. NOOR and the NOOR Foundation seek to contribute to a growing understanding of the world by producing independent visual reports. And we hope that after what you're going to see tonight, you're going to get inspired. We believe that some things simply need to be seen, and that together we can make stories that will impact our humanity. As I said, I was a lucky one. As part of a new NOOR Experience event, this is my dog. Ciao, Rita. You good? There is people, you know. So, as part of a new NOOR Experience event, NOOR and the NOOR Foundation invite artists, curators, journalists, researchers, and you, the general public, and all of you, to reflect on what's going on in our world. And tonight, we will discuss about the Arctic and what's going on there. I'm very happy to welcome tonight some amazing and inspiring people. But before this, I would like to take a few seconds to say thank you to all the people who participate in this project, so you can see them. I can't name everyone, so there is few that I can't forget, because I'm really happy about their support. I would like to thank for their support Nikon. I would like to thank Patagonia. I would like to thank the Pakhuis team, and I would like to thank the NOOR team, because what you're going to see have been done by a group of young people, Isabelle, Pierre, Chloe, Agatha, Rita from time to time. So thanks to all the people, thanks to all the technicians. You don't see them, but they made it happen. Tonight I'm happy to invite on stage 3 people, 3 human beings. I would like to welcome Bernice Notenboom and Kadir van Lohuizen. You can come on stage, please. Have a seat.
Are we going on the sofa?
Yeah, you can take the sofa. Welcome. Bernice, you are an Arctic and polar explorer and traveler. You are a climate journalist and filmmaker. In 2007 and 2008, you skied as the first woman to the North and South Pole over the Greenland ice cap and across a frozen river in Siberia in the middle of winter. Correct me if I'm wrong, I'm just reading your biography.
Do such a thing, eh?
In 2014, you skied from the North Pole to Canada to show that this kind of exhibition are almost no longer possible. In 2017, you skied 2 latitudes to the North Pole in collaboration with the NASA to underline the urgency of the 2-degree code. Then you sailed with 66 captains of industry to Spitsbergen to experience the consequences of climate change with your own eyes. Still correct? Good. You said that you feel at home in the cold. Still correct. Kadir. You are a photojournalist. You are the founder of NOOR. So basically, he's my boss.
Founder.
Yeah. Founder. Also the founder from time to time, but like. You're born in the Netherlands. You start your career as a photojournalist a long time ago. Reporting about the Intifada. Then you have been covering conflict in Africa and the aftermath of the dissolution of the Soviet Union. You are best known for your long-term project about the river of the world. You also documented the rising sea level and its consequences, the diamond industry, the post-Katrina period. You have been working on the migration in the America with the Via Panam project. Where will we go on the consequences of the rising sea level? And Wasteland on the management or mismanagement of the waste in 6 megacities. You receive numerous prizes, and I'm pretty happy to have you both tonight here. Bernice, first question. You went for the first time in the Arctic 20 years ago. How did your curiosity about it started?
I went to the Arctic 20 years ago. I'm sorry, couldn't hear.
20 years ago, something like this? How did it start?
How did it start?
Yeah.
Well, I live close to the North Pole. I live in Canada. That helps. So there's an unbelievable fascination with the ice. And I'm just watching this first picture. This is me, 2017, looking over this incredible space. All this ice that you see there was only formed about 2 weeks before. So it was open water. And the Arctic is such a changing environment. It is moving, it's cracking, it's unbelievable active. And I think that is what's extremely compelling about this place. I went there the first time because I actually got an assignment from National Geographic. I was a journalist, a writer, and they had a call, and they said, you know, there's a group of 10 investment bankers from London, and they want to prove that they can ski in 10 days to the North Pole. So they would leave on a Thursday, ski a whole week, and be back in the office on Monday. Now, if you read all these stories of old polar explorers, then you think they're crazy. But you can't do such a thing if you have a lot of money. And so, which they did, of course, because they're investment bankers. And so they chartered an airplane, flew from Spitsbergen, Svalbard, got dropped off just before the North Pole, about the last 112 degrees, and then skied to the North Pole. Well, that was the plan. And I was going to go with them and write a story about them with a journalist, with a photographer. Well, what happened was we landed at the place that we were supposed to get dropped off with this helicopter that you see. And we weren't going anywhere. The ice was the worst it has ever been recorded. It was the true first tipping point of the Arctic, 2007. So the ice has never been so bad. It just only got worse after that. So we were stuck for a week with scientists. And these scientists were telling me these horrible stories about how bad the ice was and what they were experiencing, what they've been measuring. And I was in heaven as a journalist, and I thought, forget these investment bankers. This is way more interesting. I'm just going to stay here and write about science. But then things, you know, got all hectic because the plane was able to come in and all the scientists left because they wanted to go home. They were fed up of sitting with the Russians in the cold because this was a Russian camp. And so off we went to the North Pole. And while we were skiing to the North Pole, all these investment bankers were doing was calling their wives each night and talking about the ballet lessons from their daughters back home. And I was like, don't you see where you are? This is the most incredible, beautiful place where you ever can be. I mean, what a gift to be here. What a luxury. Anyway, I got what we call contaminated. I got a disease. It's called the pole virus. And once you get it, Kadir has it. I know that. I infected him too. And a lot of people that have it, it's not, you can't explain. It is just something, it's an environment that is so utterly different and so hard to be that it is very compelling and attractive. So after this expedition, I did all these other things that you said, but that was the first time that I got there.
And this is from this period that you start calling yourself a climate journalist, or this came later? Because I saw that you define yourself as a climate journalist.
Yeah, well, but just because I was able to do all these expeditions, and particularly the one in Siberia, I should have never done that. That was just ridiculous. That was very naive to think about that you can be in Siberia in 70 below and ski and pull a sled. And the first night in Siberia, we put up a tent and all the tent poles broke, snapped like matches. And we had 2 spares, and that was it. And you can't survive in Siberia 70 below. And you think that the North Pole is very remote, but in Siberia there are no satellites, so your telephones don't work, there is no cell reception. You're truly, truly on your own in Russia, in Siberia. You really are. It's worse than being at the North Pole. But you know, these trips teach you so much, and you need these big expeditions. And the South Pole was another one. You know, there was I forgot, 45 days or something, 50 days. You learn about the environment, and then you meet all these people, and then you just sort of internalize this landscape, and you think about it. I mean, the quick ins and outs on cruise ships and with airplanes, it's not the same. It won't give you that knowledge that you need. And I'm perhaps gifted with verbalizing what I see into words, and kept, you know, try to get my audience and with my experiences and take them into my world. That's ideally what I like to do.
And how do the people react to your story? How do the people engage with and how can you share about all this? Being there is pretty uncommon.
Yeah, why
right?
do you care about a place that, you know, nobody lives really? Why do we care about a few polar bears and a few native people, right? I mean, that's always the question I ask, or people ask me. But because it is such a pivotal and important thing for our climate, anything white we need. We have not enough of it. And what I mean with that is we need ice, we need glaciers, we need ice caps, because they keep our planet cool. And it's heating up so fast right now, so my message is really we need to preserve the remaining ice that is still left. And so I just came from a lecture, just run, you know, in another town for a big bank, and the people there are just like, we don't get it. It's like, no, you don't, because it is out there, and that it has an impact on all of us is just a really different. You know, you need to get a different frame of mind. And so now I'm taking this beauty of the Arctic, place I love so much, and really tell people about the importance of fighting for the remaining ice that is left. Because it's, you know, there is ice or there's no ice. It just, it can fool you, right? I mean, it doesn't have any half measures. So I think that's very important to show and tell people, by showing the beauty of it, by showing my expeditions, because expeditions are exciting stories. I mean, I can show you photos of our tent that, you know, is on a crack of ice, and we're literally drifting apart, or we walking in a meter of snow, or we drifting 175 kilometers one way. Those are the stories, those are the adventures that sell. But the underlying picture, that's really what I think is important to tell as well. And you do that through adventure.
Do you believe that since the first time you went there and you met with the scientists who explain you about the reality, do you think that like the general public start getting conscious of what's going on there? Have you seen kind of positive, negative evolution
the
about
Arctic,
it?
You mean specifically?
Yeah, about the Arctic, about like all this climate change, because it's also one of the topic of tonight.
Yeah.
But like, do you get now this perception that the people start realizing what's going on?
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, you know, the polar bear has been such an iconic image of climate change, right? And now people are getting a little tired of the polar bear. But the polar bear will survive. Not all. It depends where the polar bear lives. The Russian ones are out of luck, but the Canadian ones are doing really well, and the ones around Svalbard are doing as well. There's other species we should be really concerned about, but I think people understand that the ice caps are melting. But there's still so much misconception about the Arctic, and that's why I wrote this book, because there are myths and about the North Pole, for instance. You know, we in Holland think everything north of the polar circle is North Pole, which is a long way away from the North Pole. And the North Pole has its own particular climate. It has its own ocean currents. It has its own air currents. It has its own really ecosystem. It's supposed to be always really dry there. It's a desert. And it's very different than other places in the Arctic. So and the other really misconception about the Arctic is that people think that if the North Pole ice is melting, that our sea level is rising. And there's no influence. It will change our weather patterns, but not the sea level rise. But that's, of course, different from Greenland, but not specifically from the Arctic sea ice. So I think by going around in audiences and talking about the driver of climate change, the Arctic, and what it will do to our climate, people will get that now. And they will all know. I think there's nobody, you know, if you know about climate change, you know that the polar ice caps are melting. Yeah.
For the public also, this is live, streaming. If you have any question, feel free to raise your hand. At the end of this presentation, I will do a Q&A. We're going to watch some little video, I think.
Yeah, I think this is, this is what is called, there's sound here too, but we'll get, this is a proof of concept of a film I'm making about the Last Ice Refuge of the Canadian Arctic. This is the hardest part, getting out and getting going from a warm tent into this absolute blizzard. There's virtually no visibility.
Literally overnight, blue sky disappeared and we're now completely enveloped in a whiteout.
The wind will be on our side again, at least it's not in our face, but we are continuing to drift east, which could be our undoing.
We're a race against the clock at the moment. We need just a lot of luck. And this is what the Arctic has become. More storms, lots of snow, and lots of open water. This is one of the many ways we ferry across these leads. We probably have to do many, many crossings right now, and we need to be more efficient and quick.
So we've been island hopping. This is about the third island we've got onto. The first one we swam across, managed to cross via a frozen block to the second, then stepped onto the third via a very narrow crack, and we're teetering here on the edge of what appears to be an abyss into the water.
And we're stopped again because right in front of us is water and we're kind of uncertain if we can get to the other side. And things are cracking and moving. It's not really super safe to be here. It's so worth protecting what remaining ice we still have. And we really, really, really have to start changing our behavior with fossil fuels, because otherwise this will be all water really soon.
If you can imagine what it would be like to lose all the mountains in the world, or all the deserts, or all the lakes, or all the rivers, it's just the same kind of analogy. Once it's gone, it's gone.
Maybe there is a hope to save you. If you have a chance to survive, it is in one hiding place, not so far from where I am heading. Canada's Arctic archipelago is full of thousands of islands and rocks. It's an unsafe route for ships, but the geography is perfect for something else. For protecting you, the ice. After years of observing climate models, scientists observed how wind and ocean currents push you towards the North American continent, where you accumulate. If you continue to collect in this shallow basin, a sea ice ecosystem could flourish for decades. Here we find your oldest and bluest ice. We haven't seen ice like this in years, except for here on the edges of Canada. Here you stay intact through the summer, and that is essential. This place may be your last holdout, providing a refuge for the ice-adapted animals who can't live without your cold embrace. Imagine if such a sanctuary were to exist, a place free of development, a place to protect Arctic species, allowing them to repopulate the region if your ice levels ever recover in the future. It would be called the Last Ice Refuge. Yeah, that's called The Last Ice Refuge. That's a little clip. It says proof of concept. This is another film I'm working on. I'm working on many films. And then they stop because, you know, I move on to something else. But this was actually meant as an example of this remaining ice that is still left in Canada, really, where all these animals are thriving. And what we really should protect it because, you know, I have another clip a little later about the Northern Sea Route, which is doing the exact opposite. Oh, can we stop it for a sec? Because it is a place where ships can come. The geography is very complicated. There's no infrastructure. So these animals, we see this already. When I skied from the North Pole to Canada, we saw so many polar bear tracks because that's where the animal goes as well, naturally. That's where they're safe. And that's why we wanted to show that if we can keep that and make that a sort of a national park or whatever, well, that's a ridiculous idea, but I mean, just sort of try to protect it, you know, then we can still enjoy these animals for generations to come. That's why we made that little clip and hopefully into a bigger film.
Because in one of your movies, The Sea Blind, if I'm correct, you are talking about actually when the ice is gone and the fact that now there is new shipping road and this is also one thing that like Kadir and Yuri have been witnessing. But what do you think is going to happen in the coming years because of this? Because we know that, like, for example, this summer, if I'm correct, the first boat managed to go from the northern road, but you already saw it or work on it a few years ago.
That's right. Yeah, I made a film called Sea Blind, and And ironically, I found a piece of black carbon in the ice, and I scraped it off. I was almost at the North Pole, and I found it. It was very distinctly different. It was black. Well, so I scraped it off, and I put it in a canister, took it home, and I sent it off to a laboratory. And they said, well, this is of the incomplete combustion of a ship. And it's like, well, how did it get there? Well, we don't know, but it's there. And then we start looking around, and you know, we're seeing more particles in the Arctic appearing. And it's because of cruise ships, but it's also because it gets into the atmosphere, and if shipping is very far north, it can basically land in the ice, and then it sort of stays there until it melts, or till it melts out of the ice. But it was a shocking experience for me to find black carbon so far north on such a pure environment. And then I researched it a bit, and we were making another film called The Arctic March. And I have a film partner in Vancouver, or in Victoria. And so we both said, stop, let's make a film about shipping. So I dove into this really bizarre world of shipping. In fact, I just came from a lecture, a marine lecture, with all the Greek, ship owners, and it's a very interesting place. And it's very, very unregulated. It's very polluting, and it's non-transparent. And so, as a journalist, to try to learn something of the world of shipping, it's complicated. So you don't really get easily access. However, after a year of research and going to all these shipping conferences, we discover that in relationship to the Arctic, there are only a few players. Number one are the Russians, and number two are the Norwegians. The Canadians are not the players because their coastline isn't suitable, and as far as America is concerned, it's just cruise ships to Alaska, and that's what they call the North Pole. So fine, let's keep it that way. And then there is a little bit of the Danish. The Danish are very good in Arctic shipping as well. So then the question was, if the ice is melting, who are going to be the new players in this world? It's not just shipping, it's fishing, it's geopolitical issues, it's mining, oil and gas, of course. It's a huge, Pandora's box of who are going to be these new powers there. And what I learned is that the Russians already are doing it. And it's not that that they're wanting to develop this Northern Sea route. They have a lot of oil and gas, particularly their LNG, they're developing very much so. And they want to just transport that LNG through the Northern Sea route the other way, not to Rotterdam. No, they want to go to Japan, to countries that have zero resources whatsoever. So they're competing directly with Qatar. It's no coincidence that Qatar just stepped out of OPEC and wanting to focus on LNG. They wanted to deliver the LNG to Japan as well. But Russia, because of the Northern Sea route and because the infrastructure and the knowledge and the lack of ice, they are going to be able to provide that LNG to Japan and other places around in Asia much, much faster. So Russia, yeah, it's sort of strange. I know our public opinion about Russia, but if any country should be in the Arctic, I gotta say it's Russia, just because they live in the cold, they have experience, they have been developing that infrastructure, and all the other people are the new ones. And so maybe it's good to watch that clip right now, because I am here in Murmansk. It's the biggest city above the polar circle. It's 350,000 inhabitants. They, for fun, after work, they go and all dive into a cold water. They naked, yeah, sometimes, and then they go and get dressed, and sometimes they do that for lunch break. And the water is maybe 1 degree above zero, and then they just get dressed, and they are so hardy. There is nothing like it in the world. I mean, that makes me even, really, well, nothing compared to these Russians. So we have a clip where I go to Victor Boryasky, who is a friend of mine. He's a polar explorer. Now, mind you, the guy I'm interviewing here, he is the first one that did an entire Antarctica crossing. Has never been repeated. And they did that with 5 other people. And they started all the way from the one side of the peninsula to the other side. It took them a year and a half. And Antarctica is the coldest place in the world. It's easily, you know, in the winter 50, 60 below. And so, yeah, it was a good thing he was in the team. And of course, the only science station in Antarctica that is really out there, and is also the coldest place in the world, is called Vostok. And it's the coldest temperature there is 89 below centigrade. And the Russian scientists love to be there. So they have a different mentality. They are completely different people. So maybe we can see that.
Yeah, let's look at them.
At the Polar Museum, I meet my friend Victor. I want to understand what makes Russia so confident in its Arctic ambitions. A lot of cultures would just give up. You know, it goes wrong. Well, exactly. It goes wrong and it's just like you pull the plug and maybe we are not suited to do that. But no, not the Russians. Okay. So what is that?
Russian, better than anyone else, can do hopeless deal.
Russians can do better than anyone else if it's hopeless situation.
Yeah.
Why? Why?
This is character, of course.
Yeah.
That's why.
You live in the Arctic. Your horizon is north. Your coastline is Arctic.
Yeah. What's Russia actually? Asia or Europe? And the right answer is Russia is north. Not Europe, not Asia. It's north.
I'll learn more and more about how Russians identify with the North, and how for decades their scientists and explorers have been navigating in the Arctic. Motivating this dream of a shortcut across the globe is the desire to move our stuff, our trade goods, between Europe and Asia in as short a distance as possible.
Why go round the rim of the world when we can go over the top? That's the key to the new route.
Currently, a huge volume of trade goods travels from China to Europe through the Suez Canal. It takes on average 32 days. The shortcut runs next to the northern coastline of Russia. Using this route to transport the natural resources slashes 12 days of the trip. Now, the international community is taking notice.
Due to climate change and the melting of the polar ice caps, it's predicted that the Northern Sea route will be available for shipping companies.
Using the Arctic route can cut the travel distance by 7,000 kilometers compared to the conventional shipping route through the Suez Canal.
This great melting is opening up vast stretches of the Arctic Ocean, and that has touched off a fierce competition among nations.
Denmark, which governs Greenland, is laying claim to waters off Greenland's 2,000-mile coast here. The Russians claim nearly half the Arctic Ocean is theirs. Canada claims most of the Northwest Passage routes are inside its territory.
The opportunities for shipping are much greater at the moment along the Northern Sea route than in the Northwest Passage. Because of the movement of winds and currents in the Arctic Ocean, the Russian side of the Arctic Ocean is becoming ice-free sooner than the Canadian side.
Yeah. So this explains a little bit about how Russians already are so, you know, prepared to do trade, and you know they had, mind you, they were fighting fierce wars in the Second World War was a battlefield out there in the Arctic Ocean, and they were between the Norwegians and the Germans and the Russians, and now they have just established new. Well, I'm sure Kadir's going to talk about that. Some, you know, airports and things like that, and it's a no-brainer that the Russians are going to be the ones that are really going to embrace this and develop this. Yeah.
You have been releasing a new book few days ago. You will sign some copy for the lucky one. You're gonna help me practice my Dutch. So if you wanna read us a few lines.
Yeah, I hope. Ik kan toch wel Nederlands praten hier? Ja. Well, I don't know. Yes, I'll say this I'll read in Dutch, but I'll say it in English. I wrote a new book, and it's all about this kind of stuff, and it's called Arctica, My Biography of the North Pole. And it is about giving the landscape a voice, because we conquer places and we go there and then we make them their own, and we sort of think that we're really arrogant and think we can do with landscapes as we please, but the land needs to speak as well and needs to respond, and we are not paying enough attention to what the land needs from us and how we need to respect it more. So this was perhaps a modest attempt to do that. And very arrogantly, I call it my Bible, because it's an Old and a New Testament. And the Old Testament is about the forces of nature on the North Pole. And then the New Testament is, of course, us, humans, versus Arctica, versus nature. And the book also starts with a love letter to the North Pole, so because she's my friend. And I've loved that place, and I see it disappear. And then at the end, it's a farewell letter. So it's a very good Christmas gift. But I wanted to read to you just perhaps a page from the love letter, if that's okay. Als ik 20 jaar geleden tegen jou had gezegd dat je me in 2017 in de zomer 40% minder ijs zou hebben, had je me waarschijnlijk voor gek verklaard. Zolang wij mensen op aarde zijn, ben jij bedekt met een beschermde witte plak. 7 miljoen vierkante kilometer maar liefst. Net zoveel als de oppervlakte van heel Europa. Doordat het ijs de zonnestralen terugstuurt in de atmosfeer, blijft het altijd lekker koel. Daarbij is de invalshoek van de zon nooit hoger dan 23,5 graden, waardoor de zon maar voor spek en bonen meedoet. We weten al heel lang dat ijs een cruciale rol speelt voor het klimaat van onze planeet. Zonnestralen raken de aarde en op de Noordpool reflecteert het witte oppervlak die hitte. Je bent zo krachtig dat je in je eentje het vurige temperament van de zon makkelijk aan kan. Jij en je collega Sneeuw doen zulk goed werk dat 90% van de energie van de zon terugkaatst in de ruimte. Je weet het waarschijnlijk niet, maar we noemen dit in de wetenschap het weerkaatsingseffect, de albedo. Ik persoonlijk, ik vind je een superpower. Je bedekt maar 1% van onze aarde, maar toch ben je in staat de temperatuur van de hele planeet te reguleren. Jij bent de airconditioning van de wereld. Als iemand de noodklok had moeten luiden over jouw gezondheid, dan zijn het de Inuit. Want zij weten al jaren dat je ziek bent en op je sterfbed ligt. Aan de rand van je ijskraag wonen 4 miljoen mensen, de Arctische naties, verdeeld over meerdere culturen in verschillende landen. Ze zijn bijzonder en uniek vanwege de omgeving waarin ze leven en hoe ze hier aan de rand van het ijs kunnen wonen. Zonder enige infrastructuur leven deze inheemse volken totaal geïsoleerd. Het zeeijs is een snelweg. Ze leven van en op het zeeijs, jagen, dragen boeken van ijsbeer en laarzen van zeehond. Ze zijn geniaal, hebben zintuigen die wij niet bezitten en zijn meesters van geduld en discipline. Wie in de wereld jaagt er op beesten die je niet kan zien? Hoe kunnen ze precies weten waar ze zich onder het ijs bevinden? De traditionele kennis van deze Arctische mensen is diep verbonden met het ijs, met hun door ijs omgeven wereld. Diepe ecologie in het Arctische gebied betekent dat de Inuit het fluiten van een walrus, Het vibreren van een walvis en het roepen van de zeeroep meters onder het ijs kunnen waarnemen. Hun lichamen zijn bakens, luisterposten en ontvangen boodschappen van het ijs. Door dit boek hoop ik dat jouw invloed op de natuurlijke ecosystemen en de impact daarvan op ons duidelijk zou worden voor de lezer. Ik hoop dat een smeltende Noordpool niet alleen beschouwd wordt als iets wat zich ver weg op de 90ste breedtegraad afspeelt, maar als iets wat consequenties heeft voor iedereen op aarde. Of je nu in Shanghai, Sydney, Nairobi of Rio de Janeiro woont. I read a little bit about the native people just because I know we're going to discuss this tonight. Yep. And so you can read more about it if you buy the book.
Thank you very much, Bernice. Kadir. In 2018, the Prix Carmignac was dedicated to the Arctic and chaired by the climatologist Jean Jouzel, and under the patronage of French Minister Ségolène Royal, who is currently the French ambassador for the Arctic and Antarctic Pole. The 9th edition of the Carmignac Photojournalism Award was awarded to Yuri, Kozyrev. He's Russian. He's a bit sick, so he couldn't join us tonight, but I'm sure he's already looking at us. And Kadir. And this unique double polar expedition, Arctic New Frontiers, focused on the consequences of the melting of the sea ice before it disappears. How did you start working on this? How this idea came up to map the Arctic? I know it, but like, quite.
You think you know?
I think I do.
Well, Yuri and I actually, as you said, Yuri is Russian, I'm Dutch. We both worked a few times in the Arctic, and we were actually a couple of years already discussing that we maybe should work on this together and meet on the last ice shelf between Siberia and Alaska. Because what we witnessed already a couple of years ago, that the Arctic, I mean, we all know about climate change and that it's changing fast, but the speed it happens in the Arctic is probably 4 times higher than anywhere else in the world. So we felt we really had to document this. And then this Prix Carmignac came up, and the theme was the Arctic. So we knew we had to write a proposal.
Yeah, sorry. Before you keep on, there will be a few maps, maybe to understand a bit. We are not so familiar with all these places. But how did you manage to structure the project? How did you define the location, the topic?
Well, basically, I mean, the reason to do it together was that we believed that Yuri probably would have better access to the Russian Arctic, being Russian, and I probably would have better access to the Western Arctic, being Dutch, which was probably true. Nevertheless, I mean, well, we will talk about this a bit, but it was an incredibly hard project to do, also because of timing. And money. So the prize was mostly welcome. When we wrote the proposal, we did quite a lot of research, several places we've been already, and basically we divided the project in chapters, where we looked at the militarization of the Arctic, which is what Bernice mentioned as well, who owns the Arctic actually. We looked at the impact of tourism, we looked at the scramble for the Arctic because of the mineral resources, and we looked at how the Arctic is changing and what consequences it has for the people who live there actually.
All right, so we're going to start by Russia.
Should I click that thing?
Do you want?
Yeah.
You can do it.
This is Yuri. As you might know, in the Arctic in the summer, there are millions of mosquitoes, so you really have to protect yourself. The permafrost melt is a very complicated and impactful issue. These are sinkholes where actually the permafrost, as you know, in the Arctic, the underground is permanently frozen, and this is melting very quickly, and with very nasty consequences is that it's releasing methane gas. So this hasn't even been calculated exactly what it will do, but it will definitely make things probably much worse than they are already. Yeah, I have to talk about Yuri's pictures while he's not here, so I'll do what I can. What does happen, not only here in Siberia, but also in Alaska and other places, is that the permafrost has been conserving animals like the mammoths. So for thousands and thousands, tens of thousands of years, they have been conserved in the permafrost. It's melting now. This is the new ivory hunt. So they're actually removing the soil to find the tusks of the mammoth. So it's like a gold mine. Yes, mining. I mean, we've both been wondering what's going on actually in the Arctic, because normally the Arctic is just a floating ice shelf. There's no land. It's not like Antarctica, where there's a huge land mass, where after long negotiations it's largely protected. And the Arctic seems to be up for grabs, where normally maritime laws apply for territorial waters which are 12 miles and 200 miles. As Bernice indicated already, the Russians already planted a flag. I don't know how many kilometers it was from the Russian coast, but it was under the ice of the North Pole, claiming that that was the end of the Russian continental shelf. Yeah. So this is basically the route that Yuri traveled. From the west to the east, to the east to the west, basically covering 9 time zones, just to indicate how big Russia is, how big the Russian Arctic is. Surprisingly, maybe in general, he got better access than I did. I worked in Svalbard, Spitsbergen, Canada, Greenland, and Alaska. Canada, even more surprisingly, was the most difficult country to work in, especially to get access to mining companies. I requested probably 10 mining companies, zinc, gold, you name it, to get access, and I only got access to 1 gold mine. Basically always using the excuse that it was logistically complicated. Yuri got better access in that sense. Yes, I mean, Russia, that's maybe the most striking observation we had. The Russian Arctic is so much more advanced than the Western Arctic, where the Russians, I believe, have 60 icebreakers now, many of them state-of-the-art modern. The Canadians have 6, and the Americans, I think, 3, which all need to be replaced, actually. They're all very old. Yes, the Russian Arctic was already developed during the Soviet Union. It's basically their only access to the ocean. So they know what's there, and they know it was developed already at those times. Their deep sea ports, their cities, their infrastructure. Canada doesn't have a deep sea port. Yuri went this summer, actually. This was the early summer, but he went later in the summer. He went on the Northern Sea route on I think it was a container ship. They were escorted actually by icebreakers, and the whole trip they were not necessary. It was the first time this year that the Northern Sea route was completely ice-free, up till a few weeks ago, I think. There's still no ice. These are oil terminals, which are in the ice, so the tankers, they move in to take the oil. What made it a little difficult for us was that it was great to get the price, because otherwise it would have been impossible to do this, because it's I've never been in such an expensive part of the world, not to mention the ticket prices in the Canadian Arctic. But it meant that we also had a deadline, because the exhibition opened 2 weeks ago in Paris, and so we had to be done. So obviously we had to shoot most of the part, we had to shoot it in the Arctic summer, which typically starts, depending where you are, somewhere in July, if you really want to see that there's the melt and that the ice is really disappearing. I mean, I think this is Yamal, which is where we are getting our part of our gas from as well. She just graduated. And it's true, the Russians are tough. This is Norilsk, which is one of the, I think it's probably the second biggest city after Murmansk in the Arctic. Yuri told me that it's interesting, it used to be part of the Gulag. So Yuri, I said, this looks like St. Petersburg, and he said yes, because there were a lot of architects were imprisoned in the Gulag, and they actually designed the city. So I mean, there are new churches all over, new cities are being built, ports are being built. But these are the original people of the Russian Arctic. These are the Nenets, which is in Yamal. And the Nenets are one of the very, very few indigenous people who are still nomadic. So they move around with thousands of reindeers. They use the reindeer for food, they use the skin for clothing, for their tents, and they are, I think that there's only 2 nomadic populations which are really nomadic, which still are alive and kicking in the Arctic. What made it difficult for the Nenets is that they live in Yamal, and as I mentioned, Yamal is also where they find the gas and the oil nowadays. So often the trekking routes of the reindeer, when they move north in the summer, were blocked by the gas pipelines. So you see Yamal, where you see Karas Sea, that's Nova Zembla, and then below is Yamal. Well, that's the Arctic Ocean in the summer. This is interesting, actually, because as you might have read, the Russians built their first mobile nuclear power plant. So this is the first one, probably of many. And instead of building complicated power plants on land, which take a long time and it's difficult to build on the permafrost, they just built floating ones. That's Murmansk. So this is the Russian Navy, the school for the cadets, and they are, they are being trained to work on Navy ships in the Russian Arctic. So this is what Yamal looks like in the summer. There's no ice, and they normally, as I said, they trek with the reindeers. They trek up north, and Yuri told me that they didn't make it this year because of the melting permafrost. And some of the lakes and rivers, which are normally frozen, were all water, and they couldn't cross anymore. So the kids, they do go to school, but they go to boarding school, and which sometimes is quite dramatic scenes, because if they leave for boarding school, they leave for almost a year. So the kids are being picked up from the different camps by a state-of-the-art helicopter, and they're not all happy to go. And actually one of them did escape because he wanted to stay home, and they had to come back with the helicopter. No. Well, then we know, Kadir, me, went west. Svalbard, which is much better known to us as Spitsbergen. It's kind of a strange situation. It's a Norwegian territory. It's under Norwegian governance, but at the same time, and you will see, there's a place called Barentsburg. Guess where that name came from? Which is actually a Russian enclave. So, if you didn't know, there's a Russian enclave in Europe. So due to this fact as well, the Norwegian Navy / Coast Guard cannot be based there, but is allowed to visit. This is Nyalsund, and Nyalsund is a small town on Spitsbergen, but it's actually a science town. I think you have been there many times, or a few times as well, Bernice. Yeah. Where they do, on the right is Maarten Lona. He's actually a Dutch Arctic researcher. He's a biologist. He's been working in Nyalsund for 30 years. Basically what you see also on the left used to be glaciers, and Spitsbergen actually, all the glaciers have retreated so far that they actually all became land glaciers, and they don't even hardly meet the sea anymore. So this is Barentsburg, which is, Lenin is still alive and kicking. It really looked like, it really felt like walking back into time, into the Soviet Union. Barentsburg basically survives because there's a functioning coal mine. And most of the coal they dig up is being exported to Great Britain. These are actually graves from whalers, which are very old, and they're coming onto the surface because of the melting permafrost. So that's the coal mine of Barentsburg. Well, tourism, yeah, it's a big thing. Spitsbergen, well, this is actually Greenland. Spitsbergen is actually fairly cheap to get to. And people basically, I asked a lot of people, and I asked them, why are you coming to Greenland or Spitsbergen? And almost everyone says, because we want to see the last ice. There's not a lot of snow, so the snow sledges for tourists turned into, they got some wheels under them. These cruise ships are, this is Longyearbyen, which is the capital of Spitsbergen, only has like 2,500 people. They get, in the summertime, and even earlier, they get about at least a cruise ship a day. With typical cruise populations of 4,000 people, which means that the population of the island doubles or triples even. Which is, you know, I mean, it's beautiful. I think if you go on a cruise, they give you a guarantee that you will see a polar bear. But I went with the Norwegian Coast Guard, which is them, which looks like the Navy. And not only the Norwegians, but also the Americans and the Canadians, they are really, really concerned what would happen if one of those cruise ships have an accident and the people need to be evacuated. Which they all say they will not be able to. There's a few helicopters, there's, as I said, very few Coast Guard ships. And as you saw in some of the footage of Bernice, you know, it looks completely clear of ice today, and in a couple of hours it can be covered by ice. And many of those cruise ships don't have any ice quality, so it means it becomes like a can of Coke if it gets trapped by the ice. Yeah, the Americans actually have a very small piece of the Arctic. The Arctic Circle starts halfway Alaska. And I had great, maybe we can... Yeah.
I'm gonna...
but now I'll tell the story first.
Okay, tell the story first.
I did there was a documentary made on me, which premiered at IDFA like 4 years ago. And that was when I was in the Arctic, Alaska. I was in Dead Horse, and I said at the Q&A afterwards, I said, I was in one of these shitty places in the Arctic of Alaska. Then this guy stood up and he said, I'm from one of these shitty places. Can I introduce Art Omituk from... come. Art, come on stage.
Come here.
So Art, he's a whaler, a whale hunter from Point Hope, originally in Alaska. And Art and his is it your girlfriend or your wife?
Can be both.
Alice, who is Dutch, they invited me to come to Point Hope and to be there when the whaling season started. That's your...
This is my cousin, Gordon. He is with my uncle Jacob's whaling crew. He started a whaling crew a number of years ago, and Gordon is the akuti, the one who steers the boat. And so he keeps track of the one who is harpooning, because the one who is harpooning indicates which direction for the umer to go. So it's all man-powered.
I think we first go to Barrow, because I was with Art in Point Hope, and then I went for the second time to Alaska, and we went on a grand tour of the Alaskan Arctic. You're originally from Barrow. No, you lived in Barrow.
I went to high school in Barrow, but I was born in Point Hope.
So this is Barrow, and Barrow, like many communities which are all native on the coast, are suffering from erosion. And this erosion is partly created because the sea level is rising, but it's also happening because the sea ice, which normally is there as a natural protection for storms, is disappearing very early and arriving very late. So actually, when we were here, you can see that some of the houses dropped from the cliff already. When we arrived, there was no ice at all.
There was no ice.
And then Art said to me, "What's that on the horizon?" And it was ice. So then we actually found out the huge shelf of the North Pole actually broke off and was drifting towards the Alaska.
I think it was a 40-mile stretch of ice.
So this is actually, I mean, it's actually multi-year ice, as it's called, which means that it's very old ice. Because as you saw also, and what Bernice told, most of the ice is 1 year ice now. It freezes over in the winter and it melts in the summer. So this ice you see is actually is never coming back anymore. This old ice. It looked like rocks which were drifting on the shore.
The young ice is what we call kinu. The first freeze of when the ocean starts to freeze, and the first freeze when it touches the land, that's when it kinu. That's the young ice. And we see that every year, but now it's becoming later. It's December, January. So it used to be August. When we had the multi-year ice, it used to be like August that we would see canoe. September.
So this is actually Barrow. Yeah, so it's you see how volatile how vulnerable the coast actually is, and well, they're building this seawall of sand every year, right, Art?
Yep.
And then every year it washes away.
Pretty much.
And then the sea eats the land, and so everybody kind of knows that that places like this will just not survive, which will have an incredible impact on people's life, right?
Erosion has always been a problem, especially when you don't have the equipment to keep it stable.
And this would. When we were, Kivalina is actually, Kivalina, there's now an evacuation plan because they cannot protect Kivalina anymore. So there was funding, right? What did you say today, that they were starting the evacuation?
I seen on Facebook that when we were in Kivalina, we stayed with Janet Mitchell. This is Aaron. But we stayed with his mother, and her brother is very active in the community, and he's an operator. So they started their evacuation road.
The problem was that they had the funding for the bridge, which would bring them uphill, basically. And there was funding for a school, but that was it, right? There was no funding.
They have to go across the main water to get to the mainland.
I must say I was quite shocked because this is the United States of America. This community doesn't have running water except this one water point, which is open for 2 hours a day. There's no sewage. The only way to get there basically is by airplane, which is very expensive, and anything you buy, you have to buy in the shop, is 4 times more expensive than anywhere else.
This is a community that is downstream from Red Dog Mine, and the parents of the lady that we stayed with, Janet, what's his name? The father.
Yeah.
He said the fish doesn't taste the same. Nothing tastes the same that comes from the river anymore.
The Red Dog Mine is one of the biggest zinc mines in the world. So this is the U.S. Coast Guard, who is, what shall I say about them? Well, it's interesting because there's an operation which recently started, which is called Arctic Shield, set up by the Americans. Well, they say it's just to ensure protection and security, but there's definitely a strong military element to it, as you probably know. There's actually 2 islands in the Bering Strait, Little Diomede and Big Diomede, and one is Russian and the other one is American, and they're 5 miles from each other. So it's the closest point that the US is to Russia, and yes, I think they're all stepping up the game. Well, and this is where Art is from.
This looks like familiar
It looks like
territory.
a point, right?
Yes. That point, we've talked about erosion. You see that line is the runway. There's the runway. It goes from the south side to the north side. And on the other side of the line is the village, the Old Town Village. And the Old Town Village is only, my guess now is about 2% of what the village used to be. So there's 98% of the village has eroded already. And we have two collieries, the Ungesikserak and Carmignac, and I belong to the Ungesikserak colliery. Luckily, the collieries are still there where we celebrate our whaling festival.
So, what's the deal with the whaling?
The International Whaling Commission sets a quota. And the Alaskan native communities that are whaling communities are allowed 75 whales a year. My village, we get 10. We get a quota of 10. We were successful when Bert was there. We got 10 out of 10 whales, which was the...
Because can I go back? Yeah. This is the sea, and this was in May, and this was supposed to be still completely frozen.
Yes.
And it's open.
Normally, since 2007, the last big ice, the last old ice, that's when I moved back to Alaska from Hawaii. But
from where else, right?
But before
Why did you
then,
go to Hawaii?
I grew up in Alaska, and we always had these big old huge icebergs that we could play around. And I remember falling from
this is
3 meter
by the way.
iceberg, and I don't see those icebergs anymore.
No, my microphone. It's interesting. Perhaps I can respond to that because on the research with scientists actually looking into the Arctic, why things are happening at the moment. Of course, we know the atmosphere is warm and the ocean is warm. But the one thing that is crucial is very close to where you're from is the Beaufort gyre. You know, the spinning centrifuge, the machine, the ice-making machine, which is a counterclockwise current where ice actually comes from the bottom and it percolates to the top, and then it sort of stays there for a year, and then it becomes multi-year ice. And that process is no longer happening. The ice forms, it just takes one little turnaround clockwise, and then it gets spit out into the Atlantic Ocean. That's why you don't have any sea ice or nothing like that anymore, or fast ice as you right on the coast.
In Tikiak, there's 3 major currents. The one close to the village is slower, and then there's a second one and a third one. And in 2007, 2008, we were traveling 10 miles outside of the village over the ocean on the south side to get to our whaling camp. Now it's like half a mile. It's like just right outside our front door.
Because normally, correct me if I'm wrong, Art, but normally the whaling season starts when the whales migrate. We're talking Greenlandic whale, the bowhead, which is huge. It's like typically 15 meters, 50 tons. When they migrate up north, and you start hunting because the sea ice starts to break, right? And there are channels where they come up to breathe.
The channel opens into the Arctic through the Bering Strait.
But this year the ice was already gone.
It was already gone. It's unbelievable how quickly
you recognize him?
It's changed. Somebody with a mohawk.
But that is creative.
Which you got from the Waterloo Plain, right?
Right. I did. That's an Amsterdam hat.
But that creates a problem for your safety because you're going on with snowmobiles.
Yes.
And so accidents have already happened because of that?
Many. We've seen just there was a whaling accident in Barrow this last season where we lost a couple of great whalers through a capsized boat. It could have really easily happened in Point Hope when we were there, when our crew got a whale, and we had to release it because we were being dragged into the Arctic because there's no ice.
So it was. They were pulling with 4 boats for 10 hours or so, right?
At least.
And then the wind increased and the current was too strong, and they had to let the whale go.
They got drifted into the other current that goes faster, and they were just going. They were running out of fuel. They were tired. They were hungry, and they had a talk with my uncle, the whaling captain, and he made the decision and said, you got to release it, otherwise you guys won't come back.
By the way, Art is also an incredible artist, and this is actually one of the masks he made, right? And who's wearing the mask?
My brother is wearing the mask, and it tells the story of the whale shaman. And my brother is, he drew this image, and he knows the story of it. It's in my culture, we hunt the whale. And our belief is that the spirit of the whale comes from the moon, Tatkim. So the spirit, the moon, the whale spirit, the whaling captain's wife in the old days would have her kattak, a bucket, and she would offer to the moon through the igloo, through the sod house. There's a hole in the center, and she would offer the water to the moon, and the whale, the spirit of the whale, would come from the moon, and that's when we would know that that there would be some whales that would be coming. And it takes 5 whales to become a whaling umelic. These are some of my images, and I incorporate the whale in a lot of the pieces. This, the one on the left is the effects of global warming. So palm trees in the Arctic.
So what does it mean if what does it mean for a community like yours if people cannot hunt whales anymore or any other sea mammals?
Identity. If we lose our identity, and if we lose the fact that we as indigenous people that have hunted the whale since the beginning of our existence, 1800, 2000, over 2,000 years. Before that, we were different. We hunted different animals like the kiligwak, the mammoth. So if we lose, we've already lost the fact that we've hunted the mammoth. Now we're going to lose the fact that we can't hunt the whale anymore. The environment is changing so quick, it's hard to hunt the same way as my ancestors, just my parents' age. So it's changed. We have to adapt to different technology. Hey, that's my website.
That's his website. Because actually your community is believed to be the oldest permanently settled,
the longest continuously inhabited community on the North American continent. Probably one of the oldest villages in the world, I would think. It's been there before Christ.
This is graduation in Point Hope.
Yep. By the way, the picture before, that's my uncle, one of my uncles.
He has a lot of family.
Captain. And there's an image of a drum that I did. The skin came from his skin boat for the drum. That's Ma'atek. His name is Othniel as well. Othniel Nick. He's a cousin. These are my cousins. I think I'm related to all of Alaska.
I promise you, because we went to different communities, he knows everyone. Which was really, really great that he took me, because you know, you can go to these communities, you can just buy a ticket and arrive there, but if people don't know who you are, and they've seen a lot of bad, negative reporting about them as well, which are that everyone is alcoholist.
And everybody's very skeptical.
So people are really skeptical. So it was really great that Art was willing to take me, because it made it really different for me, and I was able to really...
I wanted you to see it from the inside, not as an outsider. Plus, we're both born in the same year.
Huh?
Anybody else born in 1963? Hey.
Lots. So, yeah, my next stop was Canada. Baker Lake is probably one of the biggest gold mines, right? If not the biggest. It's Meadowbank. They just opened a third pit. What you see on the right is actually ice. So Baker Lake is the community which is not too far from the mine, and there's always, well, what Art said about the Red Dog mine, some communities profit from the mine because there's employment, which wasn't the case in Kivalina.
No.
In Baker Lake, there are more people living in, working in the mine. The problem is often that when the mine closes down, everything stops, and people are even off much worse in many cases. So there is this is the cemetery of Baker Lake. Well, Art can, there's a big issue with suicide, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Especially among young people.
I haven't done it myself, so I think I'm okay with it.
I'm glad. But which is it's about future as well, right? So
yeah. I have a nephew that committed suicide, and he's buried in Kivalina, and I went to go see his grave. And it really hit me with the younger generation that wants to be like Michael Jordan, because they see it all advertised on the media, and they want to, and then they go back home to their village, and they get all depressed, and they don't see the future.
Because what's happening with the language?
Since we started getting educated, the language has been getting lost. Because now we speak this language so well that it's hard to go back to Kanarukpin. Hoe gaat het met jou? Kanarukpin is how are you? So in Inuit, and it's a very guttural language, and English. When you learn English, it's hard to go back and learn those to use those muscles that come from the back of the throat. So in a way, when you learn the English language, it's harder to make those sounds.
But does it worry you?
Yeah, because I don't speak my language. I understand some. I probably know, I'm starting to know more Dutch than Inuit now. Because my daughter is 7 years old, and she comes from here, so I need to learn the language myself. But identity, yeah, we lose our identity with how we hunt, and how the ice is disappearing, and we no longer can trust our 20 ways for the ice conditions, because we don't see them anymore. Now we see just water.
So this is the Amundsen, which is one of Canadians' icebreakers, and it's mostly used for scientific research. So I spent a week on the Amundsen in the Hudson Bay. This is, I think, in July, which there was still quite a lot of ice. And they're basically doing research on the sea ice. And the chief scientist on board, who was David Barber, he's especially researching the effects of the melting of the Arctic, what it has on the sea currents of this planet. And this is, as Bernice also said, is very worrying, because it's even possible and being predicted that we could lose our warm Gulf Stream. So where the planet is heating up, we might find ourselves in a temperature dip in the future.
Can you tell us a bit about the story when you were in the helicopter with the temperature, what you discovered when you were actually there?
Yeah, there was two different, two interesting parts. So we went. They don't go on anchor, right? They just sail into the ice. I flew my drone, and which is they're pretty sophisticated nowadays, right? Because they take your GPS coordinates where you take off. And so I was telling the drone to come home, and then normally it comes back to where you are. And the drone was about to land in the middle, like I don't know how far away, in the middle of the open water. So I just saved it, and then the David Barber, the scientist, said, I just measured that we are moving on this whole piece of ice, which is really huge, much bigger than a few times Holland. We were doing like 7 miles an hour. And we took off the ship, so the temperature on the ship, if you're in the ice, is hovering around 0 degrees. I was sitting next to the pilot, and we were at literally 250 meters altitude. And he said, look at what the temperature is outside. It was plus 24. So just that you have an idea how quick this is really going. And as Bernice said, it's the air conditioning. So it's only 0 degrees there because there's so much ice still, and the temperature of the water, the moment the ice is gone, everything will change.
Were these scientists all Canadian, or were they? No?
No, it was a very international crew, but they were all sea ice specialists. Well, both Yuri and I, we did one winter trip. So I was in March, I was in Resolute Bay, which is pretty much far north, high Arctic in Canada. And I was embedded with the Canadian Army. So the Canadian Army, they are operating now in the Arctic much more than before. And they are being trained every year or twice a year, and they are actually trained by the Arctic Rangers, which is an Inuit unit in the Canadian Army. And they are actually, you know, as we were talking about the Russians, where Russians, especially the Russians who live in Siberia, are used to the climate. These Canadian soldiers, they come from Vancouver, Toronto, Winnipeg. None of them has ever been in the Arctic, and they have to operate in this incredible, vast territory and learn to survive and to operate, actually. So just to give you an idea, from the Canadian Army, they took me on a C-130 on a Hercules plane. From Winnipeg to Resolute Bay was 5 hours. So I thought March, end of the winter, so should be okay, right? Sun is back. That was not true. So it was -45, -48. Actually, March is the coldest month of the year.
And you know why?
I know why now. So, I mean, it was just they parachuted, like, I don't know, 200 snow scooters into there, which they were supposed to operate and use for patrols. Of the 200, 190 would definitely not start because the fuel pump, everything would froze. They had to call the Arctic Rangers, which would just put the thing on their sides, boil some water, pour it over, and would fix it. So, you know, I mean, it looked a little hopeless how this army has to operate and and protect your country, right? Yeah, and everybody got frostbite, including me, actually. So they have to set up camp and stay out.
This seems such a useless exercise. I mean, honestly, who's going to attack Canada? We're the friendliest people in the world.
Are you? Yeah, no, I mean, you tell me, right? I mean, but there's a lot of, I mean, the Russians are very active, the Danes are operating, the Norwegians are operating, and the Americans and the Canadians. But you do question, yeah, how this has to work, and it looked pretty hopeless. Well, last but not least, I believe, Yeah, Greenland. Yeah, as Bernice said, there is sometimes confusion that if the North Pole melts, that the sea would rise, which is not true, because if your ice cube is in a glass and it melts, the water level will stay the same. But obviously, for Greenland, this is a whole different story. But because this is land ice. This is the edge of the ice sheet. Yeah, and it's melting. It's basically we started to look at the glaciers first. We saw them retreating. Then we discovered that there was that obviously on the ice sheet itself it was melting as well, and that there were kind of rivers and they were collecting, they became like small lakes, and then the water disappeared. And it turned out that there's actually underground rivers, which this is meltwater from the ice sheet. It's a thick ice sheet, so it will take a while to melt. But if it would melt, the sea level would rise 8 meters.
Point Hope is 11 feet above sea level.
Yeah. No, but we're great in Amsterdam. So this is on the middle of the ice sheet. It's a science camp which is called East Grip. This is actually on an altitude of 3,000 meters, of which 2,700 meters is ice. And what they are doing, if you go into this tunnel with me, they built this science station under the ice to keep the temperature, it's 10 meters deep, to keep the temperature constant, and they are taking ice cores. So this means that they are drilling all the way down to the bedrock, which is 2,700 meters. And it's pretty amazing because they take these cores out and they can actually exactly see how the temperature has fluctuated over tens of thousands of years. So when I was there, they were at 1,500 meters deep and the ice was 22,000 years old. And you see these small layers in the ice sometimes, and those are volcanic eruptions at some point of time. So it's like a giant history book. And the reason they are doing this here is because they have discovered a couple of years ago that there are actually ice flows on the ice sheet. And an ice flow, well, basically it's a frozen river. So they are at the source of an ice flow, and this whole pack of ice, as you see it here, this whole pack of ice is moving 15 centimeters a day. And the deeper they get, the quicker it moves. So they're actually discovering that's probably the third major contribution why the sea level will rise even quicker than predicted, because this whole pack of ice is pushed towards the sea at a quicker, and it's speeding up every year. These are the ice cores they take out, and that ice froze 22,000 years ago. Wow. So they are now, next summer they are supposed to reach the bedrock, and then they will publish their report of their findings. This is the exit of the ice flow in the northeast of Greenland. Well, and to close a little Dutch, this is the famous town of Rodeby on the Greenlandic west coast. It used to be a whaling station. And what Art said is the Inuit in Greenland have similar issues as in Point Hope. which is that ice is melting, and especially here the ice you see is coming from the glaciers, and the pieces are getting smaller and smaller, so it's more difficult to navigate. It's not the big icebergs only. Rode baai, that's the proper name of Rode baai. Kwartzoet.
Thank you, Kadir, Bernice, Hart. Before I give a few questions, I have just two questions. Are you saying, and it's for each of you, any potential solution to what's coming? And the last one is are you the last generation of people who have been able to see this?
Well, that I forgot to say, because what I found most shocking is that the predictions are now that in 2030, which sounds far away, but that's 12 years' time, that there will be no ice on the pole anymore in the summer. We will have a new ocean in 12 years. So we are the very last ones to witness actually that there is still ice.
I'm a little bit more careful to say that, because all the signs were towards an ice-free North Pole this year, and it didn't happen because we had such a cloudy summer this year in the Arctic. What is happening, because there's so much energy in the atmosphere and it's warm and it's warming up fast, it also creates clouds, and clouds creates precipitation, and clouds actually protects the ice in the summertime. So we're seeing basically melting in the winter, and sort of it slows it down in the summertime. So there's a website where all the scientists are putting their bets on when the North Pole is ice-free. By the way, that's a matter of definition, because what is an ice-free Arctic? Are we talking about the North Pole, 90 degrees? Are we talking about 88 degrees? Are we talking about where you're from? It's really up for definition what it is, but nobody knows. And so it's all over the map. I think we have to be careful by saying, you know, putting years onto that, because it could easily just do the opposite, where the summer actually saves the ice, and we're not, you know, it may just be helping us.
If you're right, I hope you're right.
I just know that right now in the Arctic, we're seeing strange weather. We're seeing rain when it should be snow. Where everything is it's mixed up. It's just unbalanced. It's just not right. 30 years, wow. In 2030, that's no ice. Man, what is that going to do? How is that going to affect the whaling communities that depend on the fact that there's ice still? Is the migration of the whales going to be that much earlier that we don't get to hunt? All these questions that are going to be amongst the communities in the Arctic, which are, I believe, all Inuit, and we have no say, because we're governed by. We don't have our own governing system. we're all governed by different countries. Canadians, Greenland, and Alaska, U.S. So the people the people with the most knowledge of the ice have no say, basically, which is really unbelievable. I mean, that's here we are talking about it, and I'm just a village kid that came from Point Hope that never really expected to leave the community, but I've seen the world. It's incredible how much it's changed in just a short period of time. From when I was little, in the Arctic, where we had stable ice that would, if we walked on it, we had no problem. Where you looked like it was really firm and stable, and you just fell right through. Yeah. It just happens. It happens so quick now.
In my book, I wrote a whole chapter about your culture, actually. And I was very fortunate to be in Barrow a few times. And you know the book The Will and the Supercomputer, by any chance? Yeah. And that's a great book because it gives your culture, the people that know all the different descriptions for ice. It's not, you don't have a definition of a word of snow and ice per se, but what it does and how it relates to you. And that's fascinating. And scientists don't know that. You know, we just have like NILAs, we have all different words for ice as it comes to the surface, but not its function. And so I learned when I was in your village, which was once in the winter, once in the summer, to understand really that scientists need to understand that in order to really understand the sea ice when they go out a little bit better. And that was a great quote because they were asking an elder of Point Barrow is like, well, what do you think of these scientists? He says, well, these scientists are only going to be good if they think like us, which is true. And that is going to get lost if you're not out there to see that anymore. And one more comment I want to make is it's also from your village that the first and only polar explorer, Wally Herbert, skied from Point Barrow to the North Pole in 1967. Has never been repeated after that. And I am actually the last polar explorer that skied from the North Pole to Canada. That's never happened. That was 2014. That hasn't been repeated either. So just in a short period, you know, just in a short, well, really in 10 years, these expeditions have not been possible anymore.
My younger brother, in the 80s, took a Japanese guy that was going by dog sled. And at that time, they left maybe a month too late, but the ice condition was already bad enough that they couldn't make it through Canada. And they were going to go to the North Pole.
Maybe we can take one question, if there is one or two questions, and then I will invite you to maybe have a drink and discuss with Bernice, Kadir, and Art. Is there any question? One question.
Microphone all the way.
Okay, merci. Thanks all three of you for your explanation. There's another side I haven't heard in your stories yet, particularly from the Inuit in Greenland. Been traveling there myself since 1990. They have access now to oil and minerals, which gives them money and not being dependent on the Danish. So at first, the first time I went there, I was shocked, I'm still shocked, that about the identity and the safety and all those issues. But the other side of the medal is, from some of the Inuit who live there, at least in the Greenlandic side, that it gives them independence. regarding to the danger. So how do you look at that point?
No, I mean, yes, it's absolute. You know, I mean, there's a few issues where we can argue about, obviously, because, you know, the opening up of the shipping routes is not all bad news. You know, I mean, as Bernice did this documentary on the shipping industry, if it can be cut by 12 days, it will mean that the pollution is decreasing a lot. And you're absolutely right. I mean, for Greenland, which many of the Greenlandic Inuits have been fighting for independence for a long time, it opens up perspectives also, because in the south of Greenland they can grow potatoes, there's agriculture now, so less needs to be imported, and possibly mineral resources could in a sense grant them not asylum, independence, which yeah, at the same time, I mean, the way, what I've seen at least, not only in Canada but also in Greenland and other places, is that often the communities don't really benefit from it. It's the big mining companies which move in, and very little of the profit stays in actually in the communities. Sorry? It's anywhere in the planet. So. Yeah, I mean, I can only hope, or we can only hope that for the people of Greenland, it could be a game changer.
Any other question? Beer. Yes. Bernice is going to sign a book. Art Partner will also be signing some books. Thank you, the three of you. Thank you, the Pakhuis. Thank you, everyone. Good evening.